The first time the crowd at the 1978 U.S. Nationals saw Tom McEwen slide into the driver's seat of his bright, flame-painted dragster, no one knew the storm of emotion he carried beneath the helmet. Tom the Mongoose McEwen, a man who had always raced with a grin and a fire in his eyes, was fighting a battle that had nothing to do with the quarter mile. Only weeks before, he had received devastating news. His wife, the woman he loved, and the mother of his children, was leaving him, taking with her the laughter and warmth of a home he had cherished. Friends and fellow racers whispered in the pits, some worrying that the heartbreak would compromise his focus, while others believed McEwen's sheer determination could turn grief into gasoline-fueled vengeance. The sun blazed over Indianapolis that morning, the roar of engines already echoing across the asphalt as the crowd filed in, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. McEwen's car gleamed in the staging lanes, flames painted on the body dancing under the bright summer sun. But it wasn't the paint or the engine that made him a legend that day. It was the man behind the wheel, carrying heartbreak like armor, his mind and heart locked onto a single goal: to turn sorrow into triumph. As the announcer called his name, the air shifted. Spectators leaned forward, sensing the tension, the energy, the emotion that hung thick like the smell of nitromethane. Few knew the full story, but everyone could feel it. This run would not just be about speed, it would be about survival, pride, and the kind of personal victory that no trophy could fully capture. McEwen adjusted his gloves, checked the gauges, and tightened his grip on the wheel. The engine growled beneath him, a beast waiting to be unleashed. Yet somehow, it seemed to sense his turmoil, ready to channel his pain into raw power. The staging lights flickered down, each yellow a heartbeat in the chest of every fan in the stands. And then the green lit the way. The tires screamed as they grabbed the asphalt, flames licking the headers, smoke curling into the air, and McEwen rocketed down the quarter mile with a precision born of experience, skill, and a burning, silent fury that had nothing to do with racing and everything to do with the fight raging inside him. This was more than a run, it was a statement. Every gear shift, every inch gained on the track was a declaration that heartbreak would not defeat him, that the man behind the flames was unstoppable, a warrior in a sport where life and death often separated the great from the ordinary. By the time McEwen crossed the finish line, the crowd erupted, unaware of the personal battle waged behind the visor, yet feeling its resonance in the raw power and perfection of the run. That day, the U.S. Nationals witnessed not just speed, but courage, determination, and the emotional triumph of a man who refused to be broken. And as McEwen climbed from the car, helmet in hand, his eyes glinting with a mixture of exhaustion, grief, and pride, the whispers began. This wasn't just a victory on the strip. It was a victory of the human spirit, a reminder that even a heart broken in private could roar louder than the engines of any dragster in public. The question lingered across the pits and the stands. Could anyone match the heart, the skill, and the sheer willpower that Tom McEwen had unleashed that day? And what other battles, on and off the track, would shape the legend of the Mongoose in the years to come? The days leading up to the 1978 U.S. Nationals were some of the darkest in Tom McEwen's life. Yet he refused to let the shadows overtake him. The heartbreak of losing the woman he loved had settled like a weight on his chest. And friends worried that the Mongoose, the same man who had always raced with a grin and fearless audacity, might be too distracted to even make it to the starting line. But McEwen had always been a fighter, someone who understood that life, like drag racing, demanded you grip the wheel tightly, even when the path ahead was uncertain. In the garage, he immersed himself in the familiar ritual that had always brought him clarity, checking the engine, tuning the carburetors, adjusting the suspension, and inspecting every tire, every nut, every bolt of his dragster with painstaking precision. The smell of gasoline, nitromethane, and oil filled the air, blending with the tension and sweat that clung to the space. Mechanics whispered in the corners, some awed by his focus, others concerned that grief might make him careless. But McEwen moved like a man possessed, each motion precise, deliberate, and almost meditative, as if channeling his pain into every adjustment and every turn of a wrench. It wasn't just about preparing a car, it was about preparing himself. He knew that the quarter mile would demand everything. He had speed, reflexes, courage, and a mental edge so sharp that even a fraction of hesitation could mean disaster. The night before the race, sleep came in fits and starts. His mind replayed the heartbreak endlessly, but it also envisioned the roar of the engine, the streak of flames across the track, the moment when skill and determination would meet opportunity. He thought about the thousands of fans who would be watching, the announcers' voices echoing across the grandstands, the gleam of his car under the sun, and most of all, the silent promise he made to himself. To turn this pain into performance, to honor his own heart by racing with everything he had left to give. Morning arrived with a brilliant sun and a sky so blue it almost seemed unreal. The crowd at Indianapolis had gathered, a sea of faces buzzing with excitement, but none could sense the storm behind the visor of the Mongoose. His crew moved like clockwork, checking tire pressure, finalizing fuel lines, and ensuring the car was perfect in every way, while McEwen remained quiet, almost invisible to the casual eye, yet radiating an intensity that seemed to make the very air around him hum. As he rolled the dragster toward the staging lanes, the weight of his personal life collided with the weight of the expectations on the track. Each footstep echoed in his mind like a drumbeat, and he felt the familiar adrenaline begin to surge, mingling with the ache in his chest. The dragster's engine growled to life, a low rumble that vibrated through the pit, announcing that the Mongoose was ready. Spectators leaned forward in anticipation, some unaware of the emotional war being waged behind the wheel, yet feeling the electricity of a man poised to turn personal tragedy into pure speed. And as McEwen lined up under the staging lights, adjusting his helmet and gloves, his mind locked onto the only thing that mattered at that moment: the strip. Every light, every countdown, every heartbeat became a pulse in perfect harmony with the engine beneath him, and the crowd, still unaware of the depth of his struggle, waited for the moment when heartbreak would be transformed into history. That morning, in the quiet before the storm of speed, Tom McEwen prepared not just to race, but to conquer the very human pain that threatened to derail him, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary victories are not the ones captured on film, but the ones fought in the heart, behind the visor, and carried across the finish line in silence. The roar of engines filled the air at the 1,978 U.S. Nationals, as Tom McEwen sat behind the wheel of his flame-painted dragster, a man carrying more than the weight of the car he carried, the weight of a broken heart, a family shaken, and the heavy knowledge that the only thing standing between him and victory was not just the quarter mile, but his own ability to channel grief into focus. The pits were a hive of activity, mechanics moving with precision, competitors checking tires, adjusting fuel lines, and running through the rituals that preceded a run. But McEwen's mind was elsewhere, yet perfectly present. Every detail mattered. Every vibration, every hiss from the engine, every flicker of light across the gauges became a language only he could understand. His crew, familiar with his obsessive focus, moved like extensions of his will, but they knew better than to disturb him with idle chatter. Tom's eyes were fixed, scanning, calculating, anticipating, while his heart carried the echo of a life recently torn apart. He thought of his children, of the home that was now empty, and of the determination that had brought him here despite everything. The dragster beneath him was a finely tuned weapon, the result of countless hours spent balancing pistons, adjusting camshafts, and perfecting fuel delivery. The flames painted on the body seemed to mirror the fire he carried inside, and as he rolled toward the staging lights, the engine's growl vibrated in his chest, a promise of speed, power, and control. Onlookers could feel it, even if they didn't know the story. The aura of a man who had faced personal devastation yet refused to surrender, who would channel every ounce of pain into motion, into precision, into victory. The countdown began. The yellow lights blinked, each one a pulse in a race that was as much mental as it was mechanical. The crowd leaned forward, senses heightened, engines growling in unison, and McEwen's hands gripped the wheel with a mix of calm and electric anticipation. When the green flashed, the car leapt forward with an authority that made spectators instinctively step back. Flames erupting from the headers, tires clawing the asphalt, smoke trailing behind in a ghostly veil. But despite the violence of the launch, despite the ferocity of acceleration, the car responded perfectly to his touch, as if it were an extension of his own body, translating heartbreak into pure, controlled fury. Each shift of the gears was executed with surgical precision, each adjustment of throttle a conversation with the machine, and each footfall on the asphalt became a testament to the power of human will. Spectators could only gape as the car surged down the strip, crossing the finish line with a speed and poise that left rivals scrambling to comprehend what had just occurred. Magazines would later capture images from that run: the blur of motion, flames trailing from the headers, thick smoke curling behind, and McEwen's focused expression beneath the helmet, eyes steely, jaw set. A man racing not just against the clock, but against his own grief. Yet it was more than just speed or technical mastery. That run became a story about resilience, about the ability to rise from personal tragedy and convert it into a performance that defied expectations. Rivals whispered in awe, mechanics shook their heads in disbelief, and fans cheered without knowing the depth of the battle waged behind the visor. For Tom McEwen, every fraction of a second, every mile per hour gained, was a declaration. Heartbreak would not defeat him. The quarter mile became a stage for courage, determination, and raw emotion. And by the time the smoke cleared, one thing was undeniable. The Mongoose had turned personal pain into a performance for the ages, etching his name forever into the history of NHRA and proving that sometimes the most unforgettable victories are those fought silently, with nothing but a wheel, a throttle, and a heart full of fire. The aftermath of that fateful 1,978 run at the U.S. Nationals left the racing world in stunned awe. But for Tom McEwen, there was no time to bask in applause. The battle inside him was far from over. Every emotion he had buried behind his visor during the run came rushing back the moment he brought the dragster to a controlled stop. Tires smoking, flames flickering, and adrenaline still coursing like electricity through his veins. The pit crews, spectators, and even rival drivers watched as the man they knew as the Mongoose climbed from the cockpit, helmet in hand, but only a few understood the full weight of what he had just accomplished. To the world, it was a flawless, record-setting pass. To McEwen, it was a triumph over heartbreak, a demonstration that even a man with a broken home, a fractured heart, and grief clawing at his chest could still rise, focus, and perform with perfection under the most unforgiving circumstances. The story of that run spread quickly, whispered among racers and mechanics first, then printed in magazines that chronicled every wrench turn, every tire spin, and every foot of asphalt conquered. Headlines would call it the most emotional run in NHRA history. But to those who knew him, it was simply proof of a man who refused to surrender to circumstances outside the track. In the days that followed, McEwen returned to his routine with the same obsessive intensity that had defined his career, though now there was a new layer to his focus, purpose born of personal trial. In the garage, he dissected every detail of the dragster, analyzing tire wear, engine response, and fuel delivery. Yet beneath the technical adjustments, there was an emotional precision at work, a channeling of grief into discipline, into mastery, into speed. Each piston balanced, each camshaft timed, each gear shift tested, was no longer just about winning races. It was about reclaiming control over a life that had been shaken, proving that even in the midst of personal devastation, excellence was still possible. Across the pits, the whispers of McEwen's remarkable composure grew into awe. Fellow drivers, once competitive rivals, spoke quietly of how he had transformed heartbreak into horsepower, grief into acceleration, proving that the mental and emotional game of drag racing was just as critical as the mechanics under the hood. Fans who had been there that day recounted the scene again and again: the growl of the engine, the flash of flames, the precise launch, and the way McEwen seemed almost to merge with the machine. Each movement guided not just by skill but by sheer determination to rise above life's pain. Photographs from the race captured every moment of the emotional run, flames curling from the headers, tires locked in violent friction with the asphalt, and the intensity in McEwen's eyes beneath the helmet. A man racing against heartbreak as much as against competitors. It was an image that would be reproduced in magazines, books, and documentaries for decades. A symbol of courage and resilience in a sport often defined by speed alone. By the end of the week, McEwen's performance had taken on a life of its own in the racing community. Stories circulated about how he had used his personal loss as fuel, how the Mongoose had turned grief into an unstoppable drive, and how his run had become a lesson in focus, determination, and the human capacity to channel pain into achievement. Even competitors who had once dismissed him now regarded him with newfound respect, recognizing that McEwen's victory was not just on the strip, but within himself. As the sun set over the Indianapolis Raceway, painting the track in a golden glow, McEwen stood by his dragster, the roar of engines fading in the distance, reflecting not on trophies or accolades, but on the quiet triumph of a heart that had refused to break. A man who had taken a personal storm and turned it into one of the most unforgettable moments in drag racing history. And though the crowd had cheered, the world had watched, and the record books had been written, the story of that run, the one fueled by heartbreak, resilience, and unyielding determination, was only beginning to be understood. A legend that would inspire generations of racers who faced their own battles on and off the track. The days following Tom McEwen's legendary run at the 1,978 U.S. Nationals were a blur of attention, interviews, and reflection, but for the Mongoose himself, the moment remained intensely personal. While fans celebrated, magazines printed the iconic images of flames licking the dragster's headers, smoke curling behind the tires, and McEwen's steely, focused eyes beneath his helmet. The truth of that run lived in the private chambers of his mind and heart. Behind the applause and the headlines was a man who had wrestled with grief, who had carried the weight of a broken home onto the strip, and who had found a way to transform heartbreak into pure performance. In the garage, the familiar smells of oil, gasoline, and burnt rubber brought a strange comfort. McEwen returned to his routine, but the work had taken on a new meaning. It was no longer just about perfecting launch angles or fine-tuning the fuel system. It was about channeling emotions into mechanical precision, translating pain into focus, loss into determination, and heartbreak into speed. Every piston balanced, every camshaft checked, and every gear meticulously timed became a meditation, a ritual in which grief was neither denied nor indulged, but harnessed. He moved through the steps with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession, understanding that the success of a run depended not only on engineering, but on the harmony between man and machine, a connection that could only be forged through patience, intuition, and relentless dedication. The racing community watched in fascination and awe. Fellow drivers who had once considered McEwen merely a charismatic competitor began to understand the depth of his talent, realizing that his success stemmed not only from natural skill, but from the mental and emotional fortitude that allowed him to overcome adversity in a way that few others could. Mechanics speculated, fans whispered, and journalists tried to capture in words what could not be fully explained. The ability of a man to translate personal tragedy into victory on the quarter mile. When McEwen returned to the track later that season, there was a different energy surrounding him. Spectators sensed that every run was more than a contest of speed. It was a narrative of resilience unfolding in real time. Each launch carried the echo of heartbreak and the raw intensity of someone refusing to surrender to circumstances beyond his control. Flames erupted, tires screamed, and the dragster surged forward. Yet beneath the chaos was an elegant precision, a testament to the Mongoose's mastery over both machine and emotion. He became a symbol, not just of racing excellence, but of human determination, inspiring not only fans of drag racing, but anyone who had faced loss, heartbreak, or adversity. In interviews, McEwen rarely spoke of the pain that had fueled his iconic run, preferring to let the performance speak for itself. Yet behind the calm demeanor and confident grin was a man who had faced life's harshest lessons and emerged not just victorious, but transformed, proving that strength often comes from embracing vulnerability, and triumph often arises from the willingness to channel it into action. Across the racing world, stories of that run became legend. Children and aspiring drivers were told of the day the Mongoose raced with a broken heart, and adults reflected on the quiet power of resilience. The 1,978 U.S. Nationals were immortalized, not simply for speed or victory, but for the emotion, courage, and human spirit that Tom McEwen brought to the strip. By the end of the season, it was clear to everyone who had witnessed him that McEwen had achieved something rare, a victory that transcended trophies and records, one that would forever define him as a racer who could not only command a machine at its limits, but also command his own emotions, transforming personal tragedy into a performance that would echo across the annals of NHRA history for decades to come. As the 1,978 NHRA season progressed, Tom McEwen carried the momentum of that unforgettable U.S. Nationals run with a quiet determination that was both inspiring and intimidating to everyone around him. While the world saw only the flamboyant flames on his dragster and the grin that had earned him the nickname Mongoose, inside, he was a man reshaping his own life through every twist of the throttle. Each race became more than just a contest of horsepower and reaction time. It was an opportunity for McEwen to prove, first to himself, that heartbreak would not define him. That pain could be harnessed and turned into precision and speed. In the garages and pits across tracks from Indianapolis to Gainesville, the atmosphere was electric whenever he arrived. Mechanics knew his intensity, the way he would methodically check every detail of the dragster, listening for the slightest irregularity in the engine's growl, feeling the vibrations through the chassis, and noting even the subtlest changes in tire pressure. To the casual observer, it was overkill, perhaps even obsessive, but McEwen understood that greatness in drag racing demanded more than talent. It demanded obsession, discipline, and a willingness to push both man and machine to their absolute limits. Each morning, he would arrive before dawn, walking the track alone, imagining the launch sequence, visualizing every foot of the strip, feeling in his bones the rhythm of acceleration and the exact timing of each shift. The smell of burning rubber, nitromethane, and hot asphalt became familiar comforts, sensory markers that anchored him to the task at hand, reminding him that speed and focus could be a salve for even the deepest wounds. When the crowds arrived and the engines fired, McEwen's presence commanded attention. Competitors whispered about his ability to turn grief into fury on the track, about the precision with which he executed launches, and about the way he seemed to merge seamlessly with the car. Flames erupted from the headers as he rocketed down the quarter mile, tires clawing for grip, smoke trailing like a ghostly signature. Yet every movement was controlled, deliberate, and mesmerizing. Spectators held their breath as the Mongoose crossed the finish line, knowing they had witnessed something extraordinary. even if they could not fully comprehend the emotional stakes behind it. The legend grew not just in the form of victories or elapsed times, but in the way McEwen carried himself, a man who had faced one of life's most painful moments and transformed it into a performance that transcended the sport itself. Magazines chronicled the runs, showing images of flames, smoke, and focus, but they could only hint at the human drama that fueled each pass. Behind the wheel, McEwen's grief, pride, and determination were inseparable from the engine's roar, creating a synergy that few could match and none could replicate. As the season moved forward, the story of the Mongoose became an inspiration, a reminder that the quarter mile was not just about horsepower and reaction time, but about heart, resilience, and the human spirit. Young racers looked to him not just for techniques or tips, but for the understanding that strength comes from confronting pain head-on, embracing it, and using it to drive beyond limitations. Every trophy he won, every pass down the strip, became a testament to this truth. The Mongoose had raced with more than skill. He had raced with soul. And the world was beginning to realize that no heartbreak, no setback, no personal loss could stop a man who refused to surrender. By the time the final rounds of the season approached, McEwen was no longer just a competitor. He was a symbol of perseverance, a living example of how human courage and determination could turn tragedy into triumph. And as the roar of his engine echoed across each track, leaving smoke, fire, and awe in its wake, everyone watching could sense the deeper story unfolding behind the visor. A father, a man, a racer, carrying heartbreak into victory, proving to himself and the world that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit could ignite and soar, just like the flames trailing from the Mongoose's legendary dragster. By the time the latter rounds of the 1978 season arrived, Tom McEwen had evolved from a popular racer with a flair for showmanship into something far greater, a symbol of resilience, determination, and the quiet power of channeling personal pain into extraordinary performance. The story of the U.S. Nationals run had spread across the NHRA community, whispered in pits and garages, debated in magazine columns, and admired in the stands. Yet only a few understood the full depth of what had fueled that day's triumph. McEwen's heartbreak was no longer a private struggle. It had become a driving force, a secret fire that powered each shift of the gear, each precise launch, each perfectly timed throttle adjustment. In the garage, the smell of oil, nitromethane, and gasoline seemed almost ceremonial. Mechanics and crew members moved efficiently around him, but they knew better than to speak unnecessarily. McEwen's focus was absolute, a combination of technical precision and emotional intensity that demanded respect and attention. Every component of the dragster was scrutinized, from pistons and crankshafts to suspension and tires, each adjustment made with the understanding that even a fraction of a misstep could shatter a run, a car, or worse, the fragile control of a man racing not just against competitors, but against the raw force of his own heartache. On the strip, McEwen became something approaching a force of nature. Each launch was an orchestra of controlled chaos. Flames licked the headers, tires screamed against the asphalt, and smoke poured into the air in thick, curling clouds. Yet the dragster remained perfectly aligned, surging with precision that belied the immense power under the hood. Spectators, sensing the intensity even without knowing the backstory, leaned forward in unison, hearts pounding as the Mongoose seemed to turn grief into velocity, heartbreak into horsepower. Rivals watched in awe and frustration, knowing that no matter how much they tuned their engines or refined their technique, they could not match the combination of technical mastery and emotional fire that McEwen brought to every race. Photographs from these runs captured the iconic moments, flames trailing the headers, smoke swirling behind, and McEwen's eyes behind the visor, focused, steely, and unyielding. A man who had learned to harness sorrow as a weapon, to turn pain into performance. Each run became a testament to what could happen when a racer refused to be defeated by circumstances outside the track. The narrative spread beyond racing circles, inspiring not only fans of the sport, but anyone who had faced personal struggle, anyone who understood the challenge of taking heartbreak and transforming it into motivation, precision, and relentless drive. McEwen's legend grew with each race. The Mongoose's victories were no longer just wins on the track. They were demonstrations of courage, discipline, and the human capacity to rise above adversity. In interviews, he spoke carefully, often deflecting attention from his personal life, yet everyone sensed the truth. This was a man who had turned loss into fuel, who had raced with a heart heavy yet determined, and who had achieved something far greater than records or trophies. As the sun set on each racetrack, painting the asphalt in gold, McEwen stood beside his dragster, helmet in hand, the roar of engines fading into the distance, smoke curling like a ghostly signature behind him. He reflected on every pass, every gear shift, every moment where heartbreak had been transformed into focus, power, and triumph. And as fans filed out, whispering, photographing, and replaying what they had seen, one truth became clear across the pits, garages, and stands alike. Tom McEwen had raced not just to win, but to prove that even the deepest personal pain could be harnessed, mastered, and transformed into something beautiful, terrifying, and unforgettable, a performance that would echo through NHRA history forever. By late summer of 1978, Tom McEwen had become more than just a star in the drag racing world. He had become a living symbol of perseverance, a man whose legend was as much about heart as it was about horsepower. Word of his incredible run at the U.S. Nationals and the personal struggle behind it had spread like wildfire, whispered across pits, garages, and racetracks from coast to coast. Fans who had never seen him race felt they knew something about the man behind the flame-painted dragster, a father, a husband in crisis, a human being who had taken grief and transformed it into velocity. McEwen's life had been a series of high-speed turns long before that summer. He had faced setbacks, mechanical failures, and the relentless pressure of competing at the top level of NHRA drag racing. But the heartbreak of losing his wife, of seeing his personal life fracture, added a layer of intensity that few could comprehend. In the quiet hours before practice runs, McEwen could often be found alone, walking alongside his car, hands tracing the smooth contours of the body, eyes scanning the tires and chassis with obsessive focus. Every component mattered. The alignment of the rear axle, the calibration of the carburetors, the timing of the ignition system. Mechanics worked around him like shadows, careful not to disturb the ritual that had become almost sacred. To McEwen, this was not just preparation for speed, it was preparation for a personal triumph, a way to prove to himself that even in the face of heartbreak, he could seize control of his destiny. When the dragster fired up and the roar of the engine echoed across the track, there was something electric in the air that could not be measured in RPMs or elapsed time. Spectators, sensing it, even without knowing the backstory, leaned forward in anticipation. Each launch was a violent ballet of flames, smoke, and controlled chaos. The tires screamed as they gripped the asphalt, the headers erupted in fire, and McEwen's hands guided the machine with an almost supernatural precision. It was as if he and the car were one being, translating grief into acceleration, heartbreak into a controlled frenzy of speed. Competitors could only watch in awe, trying to decipher the uncanny combination of focus and instinct that allowed him to extract maximum performance from a machine that was already a marvel of engineering. The quarter mile became more than a distance. It became a stage where human emotion and mechanical precision intertwined in a spectacle that captivated all who witnessed it. Photographers captured the moment with images that would be revisited for decades. The blur of motion, smoke trailing behind the tires, flames licking the headers, and McEwen's unyielding gaze beneath the helmet. eyes locked on the finish line, a man racing not just for trophies, but for redemption, for personal victory, and for a statement that heartbreak would not define him. Beyond the track, the story resonated deeply. Fellow racers spoke of it in hushed reverence. Pit crews shared the tale with new members, and fans young and old found inspiration in the notion that courage, focus, and determination could overcome even the heaviest burdens. Every run McEwen made became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, proving that the quarter mile could be more than a test of machinery. It could be a proving ground for heart, soul, and the unyielding will to rise above life's harshest blows. And as the sun set over the racetrack, casting long shadows across asphalt streaked with tire marks and fading smoke, McEwen stood beside his car, breathing deeply, knowing that every ounce of grief had been transformed into something powerful, precise, and unforgettable. That year, on tracks across America, the Mongoose had become more than a racer. He had become a legend, a man who reminded the world that even in the deepest moments of pain, triumph could be found in the rhythm of engines, the roar of tires, and the relentless pursuit of speed. As the 1978 NHRA season neared its climax, Tom McEwen had solidified his place not only as a top competitor, but as a figure whose story transcended the strip. Every race he entered carried the weight of expectation, both from fans and from himself. The U.S. Nationals run, now legendary, had transformed McEwen into a man whose courage and resilience were as talked about as his reaction times and mechanical prowess. But while the public admired the Mongoose for his fearless driving and flamboyant style, only a few truly understood the inner turmoil he had faced, the heartbreak that had threatened to derail him, and the quiet, relentless determination that had allowed him to channel it into triumph. On race day, the pits were alive with the usual cacophony of sounds: engines revving, tools clanking, mechanics shouting, tires squealing. Yet McEwen moved through the chaos with a calm intensity, a man whose focus had been sharpened by the trials of his personal life. Every detail of the dragster was scrutinized: the ignition timing, the carburetor settings, the tire pressure, the chassis alignment. Each adjustment a reflection of the meticulousness that had defined his career, but now carried the extra dimension of purpose born from pain. He knew that the quarter mile was unforgiving. One miscalculation could ruin the run, or worse, lead to disaster. But grief, McEwen had learned, could be a powerful motivator. It gave him clarity, a singular focus, and an almost uncanny ability to anticipate every nuance of the car's behavior. When he rolled into the staging lanes, the crowd could feel the tension even if they did not know the cause. Engines growled, fans held their breath, and competitors whispered, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. And then the lights dropped. The tires gripped the asphalt with a violent, sizzling fury. Flames shot from the headers, and McEwen's dragster surged forward with a precision that seemed almost superhuman. Every shift, every adjustment of throttle, every inch gained down the track was a testament to a man who had refused to be defined by loss. The crowd erupted as he crossed the finish line, smoke curling behind the car, flames still flickering, and McEwen's expression beneath the helmet was one of quiet triumph, focus, and an unspoken acknowledgement of the emotional storm that had fueled the run. Magazines and newspapers captured the images, but they could not convey the full story: the heartbreak, the late nights in the garage, the mental struggle, and the sheer willpower required to turn personal tragedy into perfect performance. The final chapter of the 1978 season found Tom McEwen standing not just as a competitor, but as a legend whose story had transcended the roar of engines, the smell of nitromethane, and the flash of flame-painted dragsters. The U.S. Nationals run that summer had already secured his place in NHRA history. But the years to follow would cement the Mongoose as more than a racer, He was a symbol of resilience, of courage, and of the human spirit's ability to rise above heartbreak. That last race of the season, held under a scorching sun, with a crowd buzzing in anticipation, felt different. Spectators sensed it. Competitors felt it. Even the mechanics in the pits whispered that McEwen carried more than a car into the staging lanes. He carried the weight of every doubt he had ever faced, the pain of a broken home, and the quiet promise he had made to himself that heartbreak would never define him. The preparation that morning was almost ritualistic. McEwen moved through every step with meticulous focus, checking tire pressure, adjusting fuel lines, fine-tuning the suspension, and listening intently to the growl of the engine. Every gear shift was practiced in his mind. Every launch, every shift, every foot of asphalt, visualized 100 times before the car even moved. His crew worked silently, understanding that the man inside the cockpit was operating on a level that went far beyond technical skill. By the time he rolled into the staging lanes, the dragster seemed to hum in harmony with him, an extension of his will, as if it understood that this was not just a race, but a final proving ground. The crowd leaned forward as the lights flashed down, and McEwen's hands gripped the wheel with a mix of calm and anticipation that only decades of experience and a lifetime of perseverance could create. The green light hit, and the dragster leapt forward with a ferocity that made spectators instinctively step back. Tires screamed, flames erupted from the headers, and smoke rolled in thick waves. Yet McEwen maintained perfect control, his focus absolute. Every shift was precise, every adjustment exact, and every fraction of a second gained felt like a testament to the journey he had endured that season and beyond. As the finish line approached, the crowd erupted in a roar that seemed to shake the very stands, but McEwen's eyes remained locked ahead. A man who had learned to block out everything except the connection between himself, the car, and the track. He crossed the line with a speed and precision that defied explanation. Yet beneath the helmet, there was no elation, no celebratory grin, only the quiet satisfaction of a man who had transformed personal grief into something extraordinary. In the days that followed, the legend of the Mongoose grew even larger. Stories of his U.S. Nationals run and the final races of the season were retold across pits, garages, and racetracks, each retelling adding a layer of awe and respect. Photographs captured the flames, the smoke, and McEwen's intensity, but they could never fully convey the human story that had fueled those performances. The heartbreak, the late nights alone in the garage, the relentless focus, and the unyielding will to triumph against life's cruelest blows. For fans, McEwen's journey became a lesson in resilience, a reminder that speed and skill alone could not define greatness. It was courage, heart, and the ability to rise above personal tragedy that made a racer unforgettable. Fellow drivers spoke of him with reverence, acknowledging not just his mastery of the car, but his mastery of self. And as the season drew to a close, the Mongoose stood once more beside his flame-painted dragster, breathing in the smell of burned rubber and nitromethane. Reflecting on a year that had tested every facet of his being, he had turned heartbreak into triumph, grief into performance, and adversity into a legend that would echo for generations. The story of Tom McEwen, the father who raced with a broken heart and won the most emotional run in NHRA history, had become an indelible chapter in the annals of drag racing. His courage, resilience, and unrelenting spirit would inspire fans and racers alike, a testament to the idea that the most extraordinary victories are often fought quietly, behind the visor, in the heart of a man who refuses to be defeated. And as the roar of engines faded into the night, one truth remained clear. The Mongoose had raced not just to win races, but to prove that even in the face of life's deepest trials, the human spirit could ignite, roar, and soar. If you've been inspired by Tom McEwen's incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us as we dive into more legendary tales from the golden era of drag racing. where courage, speed, and heart collided in ways you'll never forget.